my name's Anne Green, and I'm from City-REDI at the University of Birmingham, and it's my pleasure to chair this City-REDI seminar today. We've got a few people still joining us. I think they're still being let in. But I think seeing as it's just turned 1 o'clock, they can still join us, and I'll just make a few remarks by way of starting this off. I'm very pleased today to be able to welcome Katy Jones, Dr Katy Jones, to this City-REDI seminar. And it's co-badged today with the Social Policy Association's Employment in Context Policy Group, which brings together people with interests in employment policy in a broader context, including demand-side issues, employer perspectives, skills policy, and strategic approaches to economic recovery and addressing inequalities, which are the sorts of issues we've been looking at more broadly across the piece in the City-REDI seminars. Now, Katy is from the Centre for Decent Work and Productivity at Manchester Metropolitan University, where she's a research fellow. But I actually first met Katy around 10 years ago, and I was a bit staggered it was as long ago as that. And that's when she was studying social policy research for her master's at the LSE. Since then, she's done a great deal. She's studied for a PhD at Lancaster. She's worked at the Work Foundation and the University of Salford before she moved to Manchester Metropolitan University. And earlier this year, she was awarded an ESRC New Investigator grant. Now, today she's talking to us about active labour market policy in a post-COVID UK and moving beyond a work-first approach. And this is a topic which she worked on with a Productivity Insights Network grant. And it's very timely given the unemployment situation in the UK, and especially in Birmingham, for those of us who are in Birmingham, but some of us are further afield, obviously, and the latest release of labour market statistics yesterday. So I'm now going to invite Katy to speak to us. She'll probably talk for 35 minutes or so, and then hopefully we'll have the opportunity for people to ask questions. So please do feel free to put issues in the chat box, and as I say, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. So welcome, Katy, and over to you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and thanks Anne for that really kind introduction. Gosh, 10 years, where does the time go? So I guess, yeah, I'm in my second recession as a sort of social policy labour markets researcher, so hopefully I've learned a few things along the way which I'll try and share with you today. So as Anne said, I'm focusing today on UK active labour market policy, by which I mean policies that are typically focused on moving unemployed people into paid work. Now, in the UK, universal credit is the main vehicle for such policies. I've spotted a few seasoned social policy academics in the room, so apologies for telling you what you already know, but I'll spend a little bit of time going over what that policy looks like at the moment and some recent developments, just so we're all on the same page and everyone knows what I'm talking about. So universal credit's now the main benefit for those who are out of work on a low income, and it replaces what were previously quite separate systems of out-of-work benefits like job seekers allowance and in-work benefits like working tax credits. Now, UK policy making in this area, as has been for the case for a long time, really is underpinned by what is known as a work-first approach. And this is a sort of approach which prioritises fast work entry, primarily through emphasising very intensive job searching. There is some variation for particular groups and in different local areas, which we might get into in the discussion today, but I'll be focused mainly on the mainstream national system and the key principles that underpin it here. So under universal credit, much the same as the legacy system with benefits like job seekers allowance, out of work claimants typically will engage in job searching for 35 hours per week. You might be familiar with the mantra that looking for a job should be a full-time job in itself. So these conditions are laid out in people's claimant commitments, which they sign at the beginning of their claim, and are sort of reviewed across it, and are underpinned by support and advice from work coaches in the job centre, but also by financial sanctions if claimants fail to do what they're expected. So because so the other aspect of universal credit, which isn't too well known about, I don't think, outside of sort of social policy circles, is that universal credit is also an in-work benefit. So these work search expectations that we're all quite familiar with, that apply to people who are outside of work, may extend to those who are in work. Now, precisely what this will look like isn't clear at the moment. It could be sort of what I've termed a sort of work first, then work more approach. So that might be, you know, if you're in work for 25 hours a week, you might be expected to still attend job centre appointments and demonstrate that you're looking for 10 hours of job seeking a week. The government's own trialling and current guidance for employers is suggestive of that sort of approach. And the welfare conditionality project that I was involved in when I was back at Salford also picked up examples where an emphasis on increasing hours worked predominated. So it was more about the volume of work rather than the nature of work that people were doing. Although the DWP have been consulting more recently on what works to support genuine progression outside of just simply the volume of work. So we may be seeing a change of approach here. Now, the sort of extension of conditionality and support for working claimants is a significant development in social policy and is an unprecedented change actually to the way that social security system works and interacts with the labour market. So right from the introduction of universal credit to nearing the end of the 2010s, we were at a real critical juncture in policy development here. But then 2020 happened. As Anne said, universal credit claims shot up. And if we fast forward to today, unemployment now stands at 5% and has hit particular groups like young people the hardest. 5 million remain on furlough, which may reflect a significant amount of concealed employment, which has really brought universal credit much more under the spotlight in the immediate term to make sure that people are able to access an out-of-work income. And a number of measures were taken in the immediate response to the crisis, including making universal credit temporarily more generous through the £20 uplift, paused conditionality in the first UK lockdown, and I think a sort of light touch conditionality regime that has been in place since that point. More work coaches have been recruited and new programmes have been set up or are in development, such as the Kickstart placements for young people and Restart scheme focused on long-term unemployed people, which is, I believe, coming into play in the summer. For those interested in claimants' experiences, make sure, if they're not already glued, to glue your eyes to the Welfare Social Distance and COVID Realities project. I've put a couple of links in there, which are really excellent pieces of work that are documenting how the welfare system is supporting people as we sort of try and make our ways through this crisis. But I think longer term, and as Anne alluded to in a sort of introductory comments, the crisis has really prompted our discussions, or at least in many cases reignited them about how to build back better, how to level up, and many have even begun to call for a new beverage style report. And I think that active labour market policy should be a key part of this, as it's one of the main ways that policy interacts with people who are out of work and on a low income, and they're the very people who should be at the heart of policy making in this area. And that's what I'm going to speak about today. So drawing on a chapter that I wrote for a new book edited by the Productivity Insights Network team, who've also been supporting my sort of broader work in this area. And this book really focuses on post-pandemic policy development. Now, in this chapter, I've tried to think about how universal credit and active labour market policy relates to broader issues in the labour market, thinking about what the evidence base tells us about how things were working pre-pandemic, and also trying to think about how we can improve our active labour market policy going forward. I think I'm picking up a little bit of interference on the mic, so if everyone can make sure that their microphones are muted, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Lovely. That seems to be working better now. Now, pre-pandemic, we know that the UK's recovery from the 2008 financial crisis was characterised by low unemployment, but it was also characterised by low productivity. We had an in-work poverty rate of 18%, and more than 3 million workers wanted to work more hours. Now, policymakers were keen to try to ascribe a large part of the success of record employment to the introduction of universal credit, but they've been less keen to take credit for the long tail of low paid, low productivity work that has underpinned much of that record employment. And whilst the government's ambition for a higher pay, lower welfare society forms a key part of its productivity plan, the mechanisms through which universal credit might feed into that are unclear. So in my chapter, I try and explore this issue a bit further by taking three key productivity related issues, namely employment quality, well-being and skills, and explore these in relation to the existing evidence base on active labour market policy. So that's what I'm going to do in the remainder of my time. And I should say that whilst some of these ideas are already immortalised in a book, they're very much a work in progress, and I'm really looking forward to working to sort of further discussions today and in the longer term with the SPA employment groups and others. So let's start with job quality. Well, I argue that in continuing to fixate on the behaviour of individual benefit claimants, policymakers have sort of ignored or neglected to consider the wider economic context of a jobs market that's characterised by insecurity and low pay. Because these work-first approaches emphasise movements into any job, often regardless of job fit or job quality, it doesn't only not bode well for individuals and the sort of long-term sustainability of those jobs, but it also arguably undermines broader efforts to increase job quality. Claimants don't have the power to refuse poor quality jobs, and once they're in work, if they leave a job, they may forfeit their entitlement to state support. And I think it's really striking that UK active labour market policy appears to have developed in isolation from the sort of broader good work debates that we were having, very much in the run up to the sort of recent shock and downturn. Notably, it's totally absent from the Taylor Review, for example. But the Public Employment Service, or Job Centre Plus in the UK, I argue is a key but often neglected stakeholder when researchers and academics in particular are trying to understand the employment relationship and the factors that feed into that. Equally, on the flip side of that, I think employers and how they interact with the welfare system is not very well understood. Increasingly, researchers have pointed to the weakness of a sort of supply side only approach, which neglects to consider how this interacts with employer practices in relation to recruitment, retention and progression. So I think active labour market policy could do more to promote job quality, and indeed Rishi Sunak himself was very explicit when he announced the Kickstart scheme, was that people on that scheme need to be doing decent work, which is great. But what does that look like in practice? So a temporary placement for 25 hours a week, paid at a minimum wage, seems like quite a low bar. And beyond this, there isn't really much in the way of minimum standards or guidance for employers in particular. There are examples of work at a subnational level to try and link this initiative with the sort of broader policy developments in relation to job quality. So you can see that with in Greater Manchester, there's been a board that's been set up to try and ensure that these Kickstart placements align with sort of broader efforts to promote good employment through the Good Employment Charter. And I'm certainly aware of other individual employers who are very keen to offer good quality placements, for example, making sure that they paid a real living wage. But it seems like it's very much been left to the market to decide what these subsidised work placements look like. So moving on to the issue of well-being. Now, well-being is strongly linked to the topic of job quality and also the employment relationship, and it's increasingly being included in debates about productivity. But there is a significant evidence base now which sort of documents the overwhelmingly negative impact of the sort of sanctions-based conditionality approach that sort of characterised our welfare system. For example, through qualitative longitudinal research with just over 200 benefit claimants, we found from the Welfare Conditionality Project that instead of helping people to move into or closer to the paid labour market, conditionality could often trigger negative health outcomes, making future employment in fact less likely. Another recent example was through quantitative research from Evan Williams using quarterly panel data for local authorities in England, which similarly found that sanctions led to increases in anxiety and depression among social security claimants. Now, I think it is important to note that I think the level of sanctioning from a peak of, I think it was 1 in 5 benefit claimants had experienced a sanction a few years ago, it has dropped significantly. So we can sort of see a softening of approach, but the sort of threat of sanction does loom large in people's accounts of engaging with the system. So it's a really important point to still focus on and address. And if sanctions-based conditionality rather than support is extended to those in work for a universal credit, I think there is a risk that the already poor well-being of insecure workers is made even worse. And this was a concern for employers that I interviewed in a small pilot project back in 2019 that asked them about the likely impact of in-work conditionality on their staff. So thirdly, thinking about skills. So we know that whilst not a silver bullet, investments in skills can bring significant economic and social benefits. But the UK performs really quite poorly in terms of adult learning participation, particularly for those who have low formally defined skill levels, are unemployed, are on a low income or in insecure work. Now, education and training is a key aspect of active labour market policy in many countries. But while it's fair to say that I think recent research hasn't tended to focus on skills and the educational content of support for universal credit and other benefit claimants, some studies have highlighted a lack of tangible support and a narrow range of training options. So our public employment services have been characterised by Sharon Wright and others at Glasgow as a DIY bargain basement approach. And certainly over the many years and the many claimants that I've interviewed on the past few years on various different projects, training options have appeared very limited to CSCS cards and SIA badges, which are construction health and safety certificates and security badges. And this might be helpful for some, but is not at all reflective of the varied skills needs that we have in our economy and, crucially, the key sectors that we want to grow in. The available statistics don't suggest that the benefit system is operating too well as a pathway into training. So looking at the latest statistical release on further education for benefit claimants, the proportion of benefit spells, including training, has plateaued at just over 6%. And the system's also not functioning well as a route into apprenticeship opportunities, which I think is striking given that this system, both systems share the aim of work entry and progression. So I think going forward, exploring the aspirations of benefit claimants in relation to education and training, not just work, although it could be a combination of the two, and whether or not our welfare system supports these would be fruitful. From reading around various policy documents and trying to piece together what the skills support looks like or should look like, there seems to be quite an onus on individual work coaches to link people with opportunities. So exploring this from their perspective as well, and education providers that are working within that system is also critical. So we argue in the book that work first was a sort of unproductive approach in normal, so-called normal times. So pre-COVID, policymakers were wrong to focus solely on just moving people into work and then potentially more work, regardless of job fit or quality. And that this approach failed to consider issues that we know are long-standing that relate to poor quality work, which is driven primarily by management practices rather than the people that these policies focus on. And also it fails to consider people's needs outside of the paid labour market. Emphasis instead should have been on supporting people into decent and productive work or quality training opportunities where this is appropriate according to their needs. And crucially, that addressing the apparent mismatch between the work first, work more approach of the DWP and the lifelong learning and industrial strategy good work agendas of other departments like the DFE and BAYS. But now, as the UK faces unprecedented levels of and underemployment because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's crucial that we take a different approach, especially if decent work and productivity remain high on the agenda. So I argue that a supply side only approach through crisis and recovery will be the wrong one. Even just for practical reasons about managing the burden of high quality volumes of unsuitable applications is likely to be one thing that employers would rather do without. But equally, on the other side of that, restoring labour power to claimants will mean that employers who are taking advantage of the difficult labour market situation and offering poor quality work can't so easily take advantage. Though the government's talked a lot about the importance of education for school-aged kids, but investment in training and education for adults should also be a priority. And crucially, if the PM wants to make good on his promise back in 2020 that we will be looking after the people who really suffer, he must really recognise the difficulties of the UK labour market and not punish unemployed people and low-paid workers for it. So instead, we need a better, more ambitious and ultimately a more productive approach to active labour market policy, which emphasises job quality, supports people to access quality opportunities to develop their skills, and has a positive rather than a negative impact on well-being. This should be support-based, well-resourced, well-targeted. It should complement wider skills systems, providing pathways into education and training. It should link to broader economic strategies focused on inclusive growth and improving job quality. I say that a joint strategy is needed, but it is quite striking how separate the systems seem to be. I mean, certainly in my work that's sort of cut across the welfare system, and also more recently where I've been looking at apprenticeships, the sort of discussions that seem to be happening, even in seminars, seem to be quite separate ones, and it's really important to bring those together. I think it's really critical that the recent shifts in emphasis in terms of in-work, the focus on genuine in-work progression, and the kickstart focus on decent work, are actually translated into policies on the ground, practice on the ground, sorry, through policies, practices, and also measurement. And I think crucially, whatever happens, and in terms of the policies that we pursue going forward into the recovery and beyond, it's critical that they're developed in consultation with claimants, employers, unions, and other important stakeholders, so that we can ensure that we have a welfare system that's fit to support people in today's labour market and ultimately leads to better social and economic outcomes. But national government isn't the only show in town. I'm sure colleagues in the room will agree with me. And there are things that can happen at a local level in this space. So, for example, the DWP and local job centres could be meaningfully engaged in the sort of development and implementation of local industrial strategies, and ensure that the work of sort of all areas aligns with these broader skills and work ecosystems. They could foster links with good quality local employers and play a more active role in wider efforts to promote good work within local business communities. For example, job centres could champion good employment charters where they exist. This will already be going on in some places, but I think more should be done to evaluate it, to highlight and spread good practice, and maybe some Birmingham, West Midlands colleagues will be aware of some good examples to share. So before I wrap up, I thought I'd give you a bit of a sneak peek of my new research project funded through the ESRC New Investigator Grant Scheme, which is about to start in May. So this is hot off the press, which will provide an opportunity to explore more the sort of interaction between welfare policy and the UK labour market, with a focus on the roles, experiences and views of employers who are often absent in these debates. So universal credit and employers exploring the demand side of UK active labour market policy. We'll explore how these policies are understood and experienced by UK employers, how it impacts on how they recruit, retain and progress their staff, and how employment services can work more effectively with them, with a particular emphasis on employers in retail, hospitality and social care. It's a qualitative study based on 120 qualitative semi-structured interviews with employers, policymakers and other stakeholders, and there's a link here with more information, but please do get in touch if you're interested in finding out more. And with that, I will wrap up. So yeah, happy to take questions, but equally I think I'd be really interested in the audience's views about how active labour market policies and universal credit can support people into good jobs, not just any jobs, how it can support participation in education and training, and particularly if there are any practical ideas and examples to share, it would be great to share those and discuss. So I think I can stop sharing, Anne.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Very interesting, and thank you for the sneak preview of what you're going to be doing going forward. just to kick off the discussion, we have one comment in the chat, and so perhaps we can start with that one. And John, do you want to read it out to Katie, and then she can respond, please?
Yes, it's the question. The focus of much of DWP has always been, it's not new, on individuals, and again, your new project is looking at sort of individual employers, and my question is around what institutional structures in the role of intermediate organisations, local government, LEPs, and the whole local economic strategy movement. I mean, how far do you think that what's missing from that, given you've got these silos in government between DWP, the education side with DFE, you've got Department of Education, you've got BAYS, and you've got these silos in government. To what extent is what's missing is institutional capacity in a more collective way at the subnational level to go beyond a focus just on individuals, and either individual employers in your new work or individual claimants in your previous work?
Thanks, John. I think that's a very, very difficult question. So thank you very much. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is a long-standing issue. It is an issue that has been recognised for a while and not addressed. I mean, I think things like, the Good Work Plan, it should have been across governmental strategy. And I think it's probably about ensuring and holding the different departments account to the extent to which these are feeding through. I mean, at the sort of local level, as I said, ensuring that the DWP and the local job centres are active partners in, the various initiatives that are being put into place to try and encourage better job quality is absolutely needs to happen, and indeed will be happening in some areas. I think that's probably an important point to share. But then I think it is very much focused on individuals and what individuals are doing. And I think that this needs, which is, the case with active labour market policy in general. So these are, what the state is requiring of individuals and how they engage in the labour market. But addressing job quality isn't going to be primarily through these individuals. And actually, this sort of approach and change and suggestion for changing the way that our active labour market policy operates needs to go hand in hand with a different approach to ensure that employers, for example, are offering good quality opportunities. From the place where we're at in the UK at the moment, focusing on very, very basic things like enforcement of things like payment of the minimum wage would be a good place to start, but looking at what more can be done through legislation to regulate good employment absolutely needs to occur alongside this. So what I don't want to argue is that this is the way to tackle job quality. It's not the only thing to do, but I think that we still do require a shift towards good jobs, not any jobs, in the approach that is taken, because otherwise I think that the efforts on different layers of government and other sort of initiatives is going to be undermined so long as we're sort of lining people up to take any and every job that's available.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Okay, can I invite Tom Boland, who's put a question in the chat? Does Tom want to come in and ask the question to Katie, please?
suppose to an extent it's already been answered, but I mean, connected, I suppose, to the work the welfare conditionality project. One of the findings that emerges from that is that perhaps the behavioral conditionality is one of the drivers away from decent work, driving people into poor quality work. So if instead of active labour policy, we could have a return to passive labour policy, except regarding human capital, which of course is these things are always lumped together under activation, which is a bit of a problem because they do somewhat different things. So I suppose could job quality be improved by reducing behavioural conditionality in the DWP or universal credit?
Thanks, Tom. Nice to see you. I think I've seen you present at some of the welfare conditionality events. Yeah, so I think fundamentally, I think it comes back to giving individuals more choice and power within the system that they are working within. So, I mean, I guess if we are to keep a system of conditionality, there are different types of conditionality that you can apply. Like, it doesn't need to be as intensive as it is. It could equip people with more choices. I mean, I think to sort of argue about the emphasis on more skills and more training, there is a danger there that it will be a push into forced training and training that people don't want to engage with, which also is, you know, the wrong approach. Like, whether it's training, whether it's work, whether it's support for issues and needs outside of the paid labour market, those are the things that the public employment services and related rights and services that people are able to access are, you know, it needs to be right for individuals involved and speak to both their sort of capabilities, needs and aspirations.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question about refugees. Does the person who asked that want to come in and pose that question? If not, oh, here we are. Yes, please go ahead and ask your question.
No, hi, thank you for this very interesting research. I work as a refugee employment advisor. And most of them will have degrees or plus. In fact, some of them have PhDs and doctors, but the job center is always pushing them to the CSC card and to work in construction. And we have people who, I mean, last week I had a big crisis, a couple divorcing, not being happy. I mean, it's affecting their well-being a lot. So I'm wondering if you have done some research on this, or how, depending on which job center, I mean, I work in London, depending on which borough and which job center they are, and sometimes depending on the coach, if he's nice or can understand, and these people cannot actually work if they don't understand English. They need to go to English classes first. But others are just not nice, that they don't really care. They said they will be sanctioned if they don't get the job. So, I mean, this is I'm speaking from experience. If you can have a comment on this, or.
Thanks, Latifa. Yeah, so the welfare conditionality project, I've just posted the I think I spelled it right. I've just posted the link to the project in the text. So that was a project that ran from, that finished in 2018. And that was a sort of qualitative longitudinal project that followed people's experiences of the sort of conditional welfare system. So it picked up universal credit, but also legacy benefits like job seekers allowance and some aspects of the employment support allowance. Now, as part of that project, we sampled participants on the basis of people falling into a particular policy group. And one of the policy groups was migrants and refugees. And so there's a sort of point about the sort of conditions in the job centre and how they interact with the sort of rules around entitlement, and the sort of issues about proving eligibility to work and being able to access public funds, and all of those kind of issues which interact with these conditions about job seeking. I think that the example that you've sort of highlighted, where people who are very highly skilled have found themselves within the system and then have been pushed towards jobs that are way below their skill set is absolutely core to this. So I mean, there are high quality training options out there. There are high quality jobs, and if the employment system could do more to link people with jobs that are more in line with their sort of skills and capabilities, then everyone benefits from that. I was just looking at the sort of stats beforehand. So underemployment is a massive issue, and if people have got skills that we can put to good use, like why aren't we doing that? It just seems a nonsensical approach. So yeah, I'd encourage you to look at the welfare conditionality project, but I think it's a core issue that would be good to focus on in the future. So thanks, Latifa.
Thank you.
Paul has a question on universal basic income. Do you want to come in and ask that, Paul?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Katie. Really, really interesting session. I was learning lots from this. So yeah. So yeah, I've been picking up a lot of, maybe it's because I'm following this stuff online, but I'm picking up a lot of stuff around universal basic income, and seems to be a growing discussion about it. So people, local council candidates saying, if I'm elected, this is what I'll push for. And I've put in my question in the text, UBI hubs. I think I meant UBI labs, because I see there's a network of UBI labs springing up around the place. So I'm based in Liverpool, so there's one in Liverpool. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on UBI as an idea. A, is it desirable? And B, if it's desirable, is it realistic given what you know about government policy and the labour market, or is it a kind of pipe dream?
Thanks, Paul. Another very difficult question for me. Yeah, so I mean, intuitively, right, it seems like a good idea. It seems like a nice idea. I think, and actually, thinking differently about how is the best way to sort of run our welfare system is we should be doing that, and looking at where it's been implemented and learning from the sort of successes and or otherwise, I guess, is a really important point of that. I mean, I know that colleagues at Manchester Met have been doing some micro simulation work to look at the sort of impact. I'm not a sort of expert in this, but I think the evidence base that I've sort of looked at has thrown up some sort of real concerns about, I guess, the unintended consequences of it and the impact, the sort of unequal impact that it might have on particular groups with different sort of needs and things. I mean, outside of that, I guess I'm sort of thinking, I probably badge myself as a bit of a pragmatist in terms of both the policy where we are, but also public opinion as well. So I don't think that conditionality is going away. And I think actually there's quite a lot of public support for it. So a lot of people that we spoke to that were subject to conditionality in the welfare conditionality project, for example, they didn't seem to think that there was a problem in principle with the idea of engaging in work search and work related activities. Yeah. It was more how that policy played out. So it was more the focus on intensive job search and any jobs, and not really being linked to support and services and training that actually they felt like would help them. So yeah, I've sort of maybe dodged your question a bit there, Paul, but, that's where I am at the moment. But I think that yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a policy area that we need to be thinking about and that we need to be taking seriously. But there are other better people to do that than me.
Thank you very much. That's really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Katie. Can I bring in Caroline, who's put in the chat that she's associated with the UBI labs and disability. Caroline, do you want to say a few words on that, please?
Hi, yeah, thanks very much for that invite. I really appreciate it. I'm currently the lead researcher and author for the UBI Disability Lab, which is part of one of what is now 40 different labs, some geographical, some non-geographical. So the geographical ones attempt to address how a UBI would assist in a geographical area, and it draws in counsellors, as you've mentioned, people who'd like to propose UBI pilots within their geographical areas. And then there are the non-geographical labs for people like myself with disabilities, and for other groups like women, because of the way that the benefit system currently is biased in a way against women. It works against women in an awful lot of ways. And each group is looking at how we remove the damage that the current welfare system has built in itself because of the way it came into creation. It came into creation supporting working men and their families, their non-working wives. And since then, it's been patched. We have somewhere in the region of 78 different benefits, some of which aren't active anymore. They still have people in receipt of them. There's a lot of overlap with benefits. There's a lot of confusion. Universal credit was supposed to solve all this, but it actually only replaced 6 means tested benefits out of 78 benefits that's available. So our situation, where there is some discourse about the effects on certain groups, is one of the things that I've addressed in my proposal. My proposal with Simon Duffy at Centre for Welfare Reform can be found on their website or on the UBI Labs network website if you Google it. And we address those issues. There are things that are pertinent, such as people who are very distant from the workplace, and it's really unrealistic they'll ever get work. And that may be because they are very sick. It may be because they're very disabled. There's also the issue of disability allowances. Now that's covered currently by DLA and PIP. There's no reason that should stand, because that actually is a universal basic income for people who are eligible for it. It isn't taxed, it stands outside of the system. So there's no reason why that would ever change. But a universal basic income must recognise other aspects. Unpaid work, the work of women, raising children, caring for elder parents, caring for young children, preschool. All of those aspects have to be adjusted for in a decent society. And I think that's one of the main things where there becomes a sticking point when people say, oh, UBI, but everyone gets the same. Not necessarily is what we're saying. It's a needs-based system, which then puts it almost in line with universal credit, but with a much bigger view of what people are actually doing in their lives and what they're experiencing in their lives, and how we can acknowledge that in some form of welfare system.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that highlights the whole issue about looking at all these issues in a broader context. Just on that, I've got questions from Abby and Kerry to bring in, but I just want to give my own question now, if I can do that, and also link it to something that Tom has asked. I mean, one thing that strikes me about all of this is that I remember when all this came in, somebody from DWP saying to me, well, what we realised was when we went out there into real life, as opposed to theoretically, that there's an awful lot of jobs that don't really have any prospects. They don't really have prospects for progression. So I wouldn't mind a comment on that, Katie, and you're going to be looking at jobs in retail and hospitality and social care. But Tom has also asked about, linked to that, about to what extent are you going to be looking at how employers feel about conditionality? So perhaps you can just say a few words on that, then I'm going to come to Abby and Kerry.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, how employers feel about conditionality is a central aspect of the new project, but also, I mean, how it impacts on employers in real life, as you say, Anne, is as well. And we started to do that in the sort of pilot project that I did back in 2019, which spoke to employers in Greater Manchester about this whole issue of in-work conditionality. So whilst the actual, exactly what the policy will look like at the moment, we sort of took the main tenets from the employer guidance from the DWP out to employers and asked them, how it impacts on them, how it might impact on their staff. And even through that, it was a small number of employers that we spoke to, only 12 in Greater Manchester. But even through that and translating that policy into the real world, it threw up so many issues that we hadn't really anticipated. So I'll just give a couple of examples of that. So there was one employer in the hospitality industry, and they worked in a hotel. And I said, say you've got someone who's working a 10-hour week shift, say they're a room attendant, and for whatever reason you can't offer them more hours of work or more pay. So they're now under pressure from the job centre to take on additional work. And their immediate response was that they wouldn't be able to do that because they had a sort of conflict of interest clause in their contract. So it really, even if a lot of these issues are outside of the control of the individual workers, and I think it is a difficult one in terms of the extent to which we should be working with employers, working for employers, supporting people to sort of cope with existing practices in the labour market, or working to change them. Because I think often, to progress, I think you've shown in your work, Anne, with Paul Sissons and Neil Lee, that actually most people progress through getting a different job. So there's all those issues about retention and progression that really are quite messy, and we'll sort of explore that. But I can share the link to the in-work conditionality and employers project is at the end of the presentation. So happy to share that and keep you up to date with how we get on.
Okay, thank you very much. Abby has a question on apprenticeships. Can I bring you in, Abby, to ask about that?
Thank you, and thank you, Katie. It's been a really interesting presentation. My question also links to progression somewhat, as I think it's particularly important that the policy finds a way to better connect young people to opportunities and strengthens the links, I was thinking, between apprenticeships and longer term job opportunities. And given that the government's recently announced plans to expand apprenticeships as part of the plan for growth, and as you mentioned, the greater focus on in-work conditionality going forwards, I was wondering if you could say a bit more about your work on apprenticeships, and particularly any lessons relating to how people can move from apprenticeships into sustainable quality employment at the end of their apprenticeship.
Thanks, Abby. So in broader work, actually, I've been looking at the sort of new degree apprenticeships, which are sort of degree level apprenticeships funded also for Underpinned levy. And it's been an interesting experience, really, because all of the rest of my work is sort of focused around the welfare system and people who are typically excluded from better opportunities. And I guess the outcomes of the degree apprenticeships policies and the research that we've been doing have been really quite positive, and strikingly so. But the question is, I guess, who gets to do them? And I think it sort of comes back to Latifah's point about, where people who have got the right qualifications and skills to access those higher level opportunities, are we linking them? So is there a pathway from a young person not in employment, education or training up to degree apprenticeship? I'm not sure there is, and I'm not really sure if there are any sort of specific mechanisms in place to make that happen. So I'm not really sure if I answered your question there, but I do think that through interacting with people who are in work for a universal credit, there is an opportunity to reach out to people and link people up to better opportunities like apprenticeships. Again, there is a wide variation in the quality of apprenticeships, and that needs to be something to be considered. But where they do offer a pathway and a framework for progression, then it makes sense if these systems are sort of joined up there.
Thank you. Can I bring in Kerry Hughes now from the University of Manchester, and she's got a question about specific training and things like CSCS cards, etc. So Kerry.
Thanks, Katie. It was my question. I feel like I'm going into some detail now, and it may not be something that you focused on in your reading, but I was just struck by it's such a limited offer in terms of the kind of training that people seem to be able to get funded through when they're claiming benefits. I was wondering if you had any evidence or theories about why CSCS, SIA, those kind of certificates and types of training do get offered. They seem quite sort of sectorally specific. I was wondering, for example, are they a legacy from a time when there was much greater investment in, maybe greater makes it overinflates it, but there was some more substantial investment in training for people who are currently out of work? Or can you see kind of any other reason why those types of training provision do seem to be the only ones that are on offer when you look at that limited training kind of offer within I guess this is mostly based on your analysis of policy documents and some of the sort of, if there's data on it, I'm not aware, but yeah, just be interested in your thoughts and theories around why the provision looks like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Don't know the answer, so I'm going to throw out some wild thoughts. I mean, I do think that this is an area that really needs to be looked at. I know that there was the House of Lords committee recommended that the DWP ramp up their training provision, I think last year, and the response was that, you know, we've got work coaches who are empowered to link people up to great opportunities. I'm not sure the extent to which it's happening. I know that, you know, across, you know, people's anecdotal experiences in the research that's been done, it hasn't been picking up training in any significant way, and the sort of the reason for that I don't think is entirely clear. I mean, there might be sort of administrative reasons in terms of and the sort of overwhelming emphasis for job movements into work, and perhaps, you know, getting people to engage in a training program is going to delay their entry. On the specific yeah, just CSCS and SIA badges, that's all people tend to tell me about. I mean, I think, I might be wrong, but I think they're relatively quick and easy to get. With construction, I think that the CSCS card is a requirement to be on a building site. So anyone who wants to look at construction has got to get that. Yeah. Not sure. I don't think it takes that long to complete it. So I think it's, yeah, needs looking at. Okay,
we have one final question because it is 2 o'clock now, but Sudeepa, would you like to ask a question on decent work and productivity? So over to you, Sudeepa.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine. We can hear you.
Hi, hi, Katie. That's a very insightful presentation. So I have a slightly different question because throughout your presentation, you mentioned a lot about decent work and productivity and the link between the two of them. So I was just wondering that when we think about the link between decent work and productivity, is it the productivity from employer point of view, or it's about, you know, workers' productivity? So what we should look at?
We're ending on the hardest questions, Sudeepa, thank you. Yeah, so I think to sort of point you in the direction of the Productivity Insights Network, I guess there are different ways that you can think about productivity, the different ways that you can measure it. There are different approaches to it, and it really depends on the various different strategies that individual employers and sort of policymakers take. I mean, one option is to sort of pursue a low road route towards productivity where you just try and cut labour costs. And, you know, it's a bit of a race to the bottom. But I think that increasingly now people are more interested in sustainable and inclusive employment. But crucially, you know, not just at any cost, and productivity is definitely a central concern for a lot of employers as well. So I'm going to fudge the answer and say there's no simple area, but I think that it seems to be in a staple statement in a lot of policy documents. So in universal credit policy documents, is going to improve productivity, but how, in what way? It just seems to be missing from the debate, and I think, you know, let's have that debate going forward. Thanks, Sudhi.
Thank you.
Okay, I think various people it's gone 2 o'clock, so I think probably it's best to draw this to a close now. I think just one final reflection from me, and something we didn't really cover in the discussion, but I think is quite interesting, is what can be done at a local level through institutional links and partnership working to try and get to a better place on some of these issues in terms of quality jobs, well-being, progression, etc. You did mention the Greater Manchester case. I mean, obviously that's sort of voluntary, but I think there's a lot that could be done there in terms of at least trying to make some improvements at the margins. So I'd just like to thank in particular Katy for a very interesting presentation today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and listening. I'd like to thank the people that asked questions, and just to say that the City-REDI external seminar series is ongoing on Wednesdays, more or less every other Wednesday, but do look out at City-REDI tweets to see when the next ones are, and you'd be very welcome to join in later. But many thanks, Katy, and thanks to everyone else, and have a nice rest of the day and rest of the week, everyone. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.